Thank you all for coming. I'm Timothy O'Leary, head of the School of Humanities, and this is our second forum on the umbrella movement. The first one was a couple of months ago. The first one, for those of you who were here, was very... we had a lot of people in the room last time. This time there are fewer people, which in a way is better. Last time we talked about how... The last time was during the 79-day occupation of Admiralty and Montauk and so on. And we said the point of that forum was to have a kind of to step back a bit from what was happening and think about what was happening, think about its significance, analyze it, theorize it. Today, after the end of the Occupy, at least the first phase, let's say, perhaps, of the umbrella movement, a little bit more calm even perhaps than it was last time, and gives us another opportunity to think about, this time, issues relating to gender and the Occupy movement. This forum today the panel has been organized by Professor Gina Marchetti from the School of Humanities, from the Department of Comparative Literature. With the panelists, she will introduce the panelists. So I just want to say thank you for coming, and also tell you that there will actually be a third forum. We are planning a third one perhaps next month, or anyway, in the near future there will be a third forum on the theme of creativity and art in the umbrella movement. So that's another one to look forward to. Maybe we'll get an even smaller venue for that one, I'm not sure. We'll see what happens. In any case, welcome to the panel, and I'll let Gina introduce them to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Timothy, and thank you all for coming today. I'm delighted to be able to introduce our panelists, but I would like to just say a couple of words about the theme for today. One of the things that struck me most about Occupy Central was the active involvement of women as participants, as commentators, as creative voices within and outside of the movement. But they were, from my point of view, sorely neglected in the various public discourses involving the Occupy movement here in Hong Kong. And their issues and concerns and involvement, I don't think, was taken as seriously or as studied as rigorously as it needs to be. So because of that, I mentioned this to Timothy, and Timothy said right away, well, of course we should have a forum about it, which I'm delighted to be able to have you all here today for. When I think about suffrage, I think immediately of suffragettes, and I think immediately of the commitment of women to getting the vote, not just in the United States and the UK, where we think of, the suffragettes, chating themselves to build at public buildings and that sort of thing and being jailed, but also around the world. Suffrage has been an issue that has been on the agenda for women as a group for many, many decades. And it continues to be an issue, clearly, for women who have particular concerns that need to get public voice. And one of the main ways to get public voice within the public sphere is to use one's vote. And not only is it a question of suffrage for voting, but also for the ability to run for and hold office. And these seem to be the two major issues of Occupy, as it has manifested itself in Central, and also more generally of the women's movement, not just in the past, but also today. So I wanted to look at the way in which these things coincided, and to have a public platform, a university platform today, to talk not just about women and suffrage, but about how women are engaged in this movement for suffrage, okay, and how they see themselves as part of this movement, and what other concerns and issues they're bringing to the table that have not gotten the notice that they should. So when I was putting this panel together, I immediately thought of some key feminist and women's voices here in Hong Kong that have, really contributed a lot. So I'm delighted today. We're going to go in the order that we see here. And I'm delighted today to introduce these folks to you. First, of course, is Katrine Jacobs, who is our colleague here coming from the Department of Cultural and Religious Studies at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. She is one of the leading figures, of course, in sexuality and gender studies, particularly in the expression of sexuality in the media, including writing of such acclaimed books as People's Pornography, which is recently published by Intellect, right? Okay, and many other books. And she is also quite involved in women's media concerns, women as media makers and activists, and is, I would say, an activist in your own right. Yeah, okay. The next person is, of course, Leda Hong Fincher, who is fairly new to Hong Kong, but I think everyone knows her name from the Leftover Woman book, which is an amazing book, an amazing piece of scholarship that, you know, immediately when I saw it in the bookstore, I bought it, read it. My son read it. Yeah. It was just just an amazingly engaging and up-to-date look at women in the mainland. And I thought she would add a particularly important voice. She's now teaching here in the Division of Social Science at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And we're delighted to have her here in Hong Kong with us. And I thought she would add a particularly important voice as someone who knew exactly what was going on in terms of women and women's issues in the mainland, and bring that expertise to our understanding of the cross-border, us on the other side of the border today. Next, we have Miranda Sato, whom we all know. She was on the other panel as well. She's works with me, my colleague, in the Department of Comparative Literature, School of Humanities, here at the University of Hong Kong. And she's worked her entire academic career on activism, including material particularly on activism and radicalism in contemporary Chinese societies, all kinds of fantastic work on cultural policy, the cultural studies approaches to various movements here, including the Queen's Pier activism, as well as an umbrella movement now. And I'm delighted she's able to join us. Next we have, I think needs no introduction, Yvonne Leung, who is one of the major forces from the Hong Kong Student Union, who's studying politics and law here at the University of Hong Kong, and is one of the most visible faces of the umbrella movement, and we're absolutely delighted to have her here today. We also have Fermi Wong, who is the founder of Unison Hong Kong, which is an organization that has been created to defend the rights and justice of ethnic minorities of Hong Kong, to promote racial harmony and cultural sensitivity in our Chinese-dominated community. And she will have quite a lot to say about her own observations about the umbrella movement and women involved in it. Finally, I'm absolutely delighted that Pooja Kapai, who's a professor of law here at the University of Hong Kong, my colleague, and also my colleague in the Center for Research into Women's Issues here at the University of Hong Kong. I'm delighted that she's here, and she is here not in the formal capacity of a panelist, but here to help me with the discussion at the end of the panel today. And I'm delighted to have her here, as well as the expertise she brings from her involvement in law, human rights issues, diversity issues, as well as in women's issues. So thank you so much, Pooja, for being here. And let's start in the order I have announced, with Katrine coming first. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. Wonderful introductions, and I already feel more focused than I was before, just listening to Gina. So, dear CY Long, please open your ear. Who you gonna fuck today, and who you gonna fuck today? Yeah. Initially, I was a bit intimidated to talk about the occupation when it was actually happening, and some academics were getting together and opening the mobile democracy classroom. I think Marana was also involved in that initiative as well. And I thought, well, I don't know if I can go give talks, first of all, as a foreigner, because I don't speak the Cantonese language, and also because I thought maybe the topic of sexuality and pornography would not be relevant to this movement. But then as the movement matured, I realized that it was actually a very feminine movement, not only because of the involvement of women, but also because of the styles of protests and art forms. So I started thinking about the languages of dissent and activism being used in this movement, and I'm going to just outline two different ones. And the first one is nudity activism, which is maybe one can think of it as a feminist sort of protest style, and also feminist gaze onto queer leadership, the second one. So this is also related to the fact that a lot of the movement styles, the feminist styles of activism are interrelated with our use of social media now. So, for instance, a lot of my knowledge about the movement came from Reddit, from this particular Reddit site. I think some of you have also been following it probably. And it was aggregated news from a wide variety of netizen blogs as well as news blogs and so on. So it was really this amalgam of cultural insights coming together in a way that I've never seen before in Hong Kong, never witnessed that. So it was not only was there a movement going on, there was this transformation of the social media system going on at the same time. And that's where I first found out about this nudity activist project called Protest Female Bodies for the Future, created by Boudoir, Glamour Rita Noir, and Naughty Nuts. They're all burlesque dancers. They are trained as burlesque dancers, and they started uploading these naked pictures with different slogans, as well as just other types of photography. One of the performers is actually also pregnant, so she was using her pregnancy to, create an image of positive change and trying to think about creating a new, a different kind of offspring for Hong Kong, I suppose. And then this ambiguous image I thought was really interesting because it refers to the plastic wrap and the pepper spray and the tear gas, but it also could be read as a very sexualized image. Anyway, this project was very daring, and I'm glad to open with it actually, because I was really happy to see that this kind of visual imaging was coming along in this movement. And also that, people were reacting to it. Of course, when you are going to do this kind of activism, there's going to be a lot of negative, a lot of knee-jerk reactions, but that's actually part of it. It's kind of a dialogic movement where the performer wants to get feedback and have a kind of dialogue. And it's also a global activist style, because women all over the world are now using nudity for activist purposes, including in mainland China, of course. There was 1 year ago, there was a whole movement of young queers and young feminists using online nudity, as well as Ai Xiaoming, the famous documentary filmmaker, joined in as well. So this was the first thing that really struck me as feminist and feminine. And at first, maybe one could think, well, maybe this has little to do with the movement. But then the more I thought about it, no, this is the epitome of the movement as well. If we can rethink the goal, if we're allowing ourselves to rethink the goals of it. Second thing is what I call the drifting eyeballs. This is related to the Alexter Facebook group, also a very social media type of phenomenon, where the boys love fans, the people who think about queer relations between male characters and male role models, have erotic fantasies. And that project also really kicked off in a way that we couldn't have thought about. And that also had a large following on Facebook, much larger than the nudity activism, by the way. The nudity activism is something tiny, but this was a much bigger kind of wave. So here's the drifting eyeballs. It's just looking at male leadership, and not in a sense that, you trying to find out exactly what they're trying to do and what their program is, but you're allowing yourself to have another type of fantasy about it. And so, again, you can think about it as, well, is that not a distraction? Is that really something we can take serious? Isn't that a little bit annoying? And again, these people also get attacked a lot by male activists, by gay activists, and so on. But then my students who are also here today, and they did their own research and they interviewed the Alexter fan group people, and then they came up with this notion of, in Chinese, I'm sorry, I can't really say it in Chinese, but in the English translation is to shell peanuts. So the movement goes on, there's a lot of things going on in the front line, but there's also a lot of times when there's nothing going on and there's a lot of boredom, and everybody's extremely anxious, waiting for some kind of conflict to happen. So there needs to be ways in which people can just relax and reduce pressure. And that was reiterated by a lot of these Alexter activists, that they did, through this fandom group, they did find out more information about the movement, and they also were able to just relax and enjoy it more. And then, of course, the fantastic thing happened, which is that the two student leaders actually joined the rally. And this is also something that is very, it's an amazing part of this movement, actually, this kind of merger between the umbrella movement and the LGBT movement in Hong Kong. I mean, that is really maybe even more important. And then finally, so once your eyeballs start drifting, they can go all over, and so you can see all kinds of things. So part of this LGBT rally is President Xi Jinping. I mean, people start playing with his image. So I think that the Alexter movement and the idea to fantasize about male leaders is also related, for instance, to this very, very famous image, the meme that then started drifting and drifting, right? And drifting more, and it just went on, and it's fun, and it's you know, it's perhaps related to femininity and the idea that activism can happen in all kinds of places, and that male leaders can also be rethought. So then I came up with my kind of conclusion about what is umbrella activism. It's not so much that I'm defending social media here or nude images, but more the idea that that we are through this movement also rebuilding art and media platforms and reimagining gender roles, and that this kind of activism cannot be separated from the goal of universal suffrage. And also these new languages that I'm talking about, and that are some of them are quite popular, I think they're affecting people quite deeply too. So it's also a matter of affect, and how, you know, in the end, when, for instance, now in this post-umbrella time phase, when we don't have universal suffrage and we're having this hangover, political hangover, but I feel like these languages, these images, these styles are very much part of who we have become, actually. And so this is why I think it's very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Gina Marchetti, for inviting me today. I'm really honored to be here. I'm very excited to be hearing from Yvonne Leong as well. I'm a huge admirer of yours. So, like many of you here, I'm sure, I've been tremendously moved by the passion and commitment of the Hong Kong people to universal suffrage. And I think that this Occupy movement, or the umbrella movement, has been a profoundly transformative event for thousands, hundreds of thousands of Hong Kong people. And it's also been very important for people in the mainland. It's, of course, led to a political awakening for many university students, young students, and high school students. Now that the actual occupation of the streets has ended, I think that we are entering into a much more difficult period, a very long period of struggle. And I think this period of struggle is going to last for many, many years. It's a period of struggle against Beijing's encroachment on many freedoms in Hong Kong. The freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, freedom of expression, academic freedom. And these are going to be very difficult questions over the next few years. But what does this political struggle have to do with women's rights? Well, as Professor Marchetti mentioned earlier, the media really neglected, and I agree with you, that the mainstream media in Hong Kong and the international media really neglected the incredibly deep involvement of women and girls at all levels of the protest. But if you look at the Chinese state media has also neglected women entirely. There is absolutely no mention in their coverage of the Occupy movement in Hong Kong, no mention of gender relations, absolutely no mention of women's rights. There's been no mention in the Chinese state media that Hong Kong women, young women, old women, girls have been involved at every single point in the Occupy movement for democracy. There's no mention of the fact that on the front lines of the protest in Hong Kong, women have been the target of organized sexual assault by thugs, while police officers stood by and did absolutely nothing to prevent it. So the Chinese state media describes the Hong Kong Occupy movement as, quote, an illegal movement, orchestrated and organized by external anti-China forces. It's influenced by what they call the color revolutions, which refers to the Arab Spring, or pro-independence forces. The movement is depicted as a grave threat to Hong Kong's economic prosperity and a grave threat to Hong Kong's social stability, a grave threat to Hong Kong's status as a global city. Now, last Friday, Xinhua News just reported that China's Communist Party leadership approved a new set of security goals for the country. This security document was ratified by the ruling Politburo, and it doesn't spell out the perceived threat posed by Hong Kong's pro-democracy protests. But clearly, this document is going to have profound implications for Hong Kong's future. Xinhua's report on the Politburo document warns that, quote, international developments are turbulent and volatile. It says security risks and challenges are unprecedented. And this is what really caught my eye. The Politburo announcement said, there must be constant strengthening of a sense of peril. That is, Beijing will continue to make everyone believe that they are in peril, that there is danger, there is always danger lurking everywhere. And that obviously includes a danger to China posed by these pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. Now, in constantly strengthening a sense of peril, this language, Beijing justifies all kinds of crackdowns on civil society. So it is spending more money each year to tackle domestic security threats than it spends each year on the foreign defense budget. So this Chinese government obsession with maintaining social and political stability has made it obviously very difficult for rights groups of all kinds to function in the mainland. And this is particularly true of women's rights groups. As a result, it's very, very unlikely, I believe, that a large-scale independent feminist movement will develop in mainland China. It's extremely difficult for women's rights groups in the People's Republic to become legally registered as a so-called non-governmental organization. And when it's so difficult to register as a legal entity, this means that it's very hard for feminist activists to raise funding, to organize events, to raise awareness about women's rights abuses. And as a result, Chinese feminism has been really overwhelmingly dominated by the Communist Party agency, the state agency officially representing women's interests, which is the All China Women's Federation. But the All China Women's Federation, even though it pays lip service to gender equality, it actually doesn't really protect women's rights. In spite of being the All China Women's Federation, the Women's Federation more often works to control and oppress women, making sure that they conform to their traditional roles as wives and mothers. And meanwhile, individual feminist activists in the mainland are beleaguered and constantly risk getting arrested or having their group closed down by the authorities. Now, in this context of ever-tightening constraints on civil society and organizing in mainland China, Hong Kong takes on even more importance as a place where people are still able to openly protest against social injustice. So Hong Kong women haven't achieved total gender equality. I don't believe that true gender equality has actually been realized anywhere in the world. But the rule of law in Hong Kong makes it possible for women to actually sue, to take legal action against gender discrimination in the workplace, for example, and to actually win a case and be awarded damages. The rule of law in Hong Kong makes it possible for abused women to obtain legal protection from domestic violence. And although women in Hong Kong still face a lot of pressure to get married, if you just look at the statistics, you can see that many, many more women in Hong Kong are choosing to delay marriage in order to pursue their careers and their dreams. So I think many of the women taking part in the Occupy movement wouldn't necessarily identify themselves as feminist. But in fact, the fight for true emancipation of women is deeply threatening to the Chinese authoritarian system as it functions today. As any Communist Party publication will tell you, marriage and family form what they call the basic cell of society. A harmonious marriage is considered the foundation of a harmonious society, which is code for social stability. So from the Chinese government's perspective, single women who don't conform to their traditional roles as wives and mothers are unnatural and threatening to the moral fabric. They are failing to perform their biological duty to give birth to a child and to tame a restless man. From Beijing's point of view, married couples, preferably with a child or two, are much less likely to take to the streets in anger. So the mere fact that Hong Kong women marry on average much later than women in the mainland poses a threat to the Chinese government's goal of promoting marriage. And this marriage promotion is a key goal to deal with the extreme sex ratio imbalance in China and the demographic crisis of millions of single men who will be unable to find brides in the future. So these men are viewed as yet another grave threat to social stability. And I just want to say that looking to the future, I hope that the women who very bravely took to the streets in Hong Kong to fight for universal suffrage can continue to broaden this fight for true equality with men in Hong Kong and take these rights and freedoms in Hong Kong. The rights and freedoms that you enjoy in Hong Kong, if we've learned anything from the last few months, it's that these rights and freedoms cannot be taken for granted. Thank you.
Okay, gonna continue on with some of those juicy stuff that Katrine started. Umbrella Fund. There are so many different roles that women play in this movement. I think all roles pervasively. So who are they? Now, it's also women like Marianne King right here who actually remembered and bothered to do a survey about who they are. Right? And we discovered that in this movement, 54% are female. And you actually see only 1% are domestic workers, which means most of us have a job outside the home. Okay, in terms of age, I think somebody is going to talk about this more on the 29th during lunch. So I'm going to do this quickly. It's people from 18 to 49, so quite a lot of us here. Young adults and also what I see is women bringing everyday culture to Occupy, and a lot of them were groupies. They work in WhatsApp groups and all sorts of groups, and there is a culture of learn it together and do it together, LIT-DIT, that replaces the individualist DIY culture. Okay. So this Popo goes to Occupy every day, or else her conscience doesn't feel right. Okay, and these old aunties are also doing, donating and making breakfast that has got a lot of, even lecithin powder, and black sesame sauce and so on, making sure we get nutritious breakfast. So all these compassionate, passionate, nurturing, and wise participation from older women. And you actually see older people, 40 to 65, they stay longer, right? At least 31 days or more. So they actually, the backbone that keeps the sites going. I like this, right? Very tidy. So there are also women that are invisible because they do those jobs that if they were exposed won't work. Strategy, negotiation, mediation, decision. So these are the really heavyweight women. They're trustworthy, responsibility, leadership, bravery, calm, and not to mention high EQ, IQ, and adversity quotient if you don't understand that, AQ, and charisma. And we have Yvonne here, one of those. So who do you think are womaning and defending some of our much appreciated supply stations? Yang Mei, it's one of them, and she is from Tongganse, same roots, meaning she and her sister comrades fiercely defends a supply station in Mongkot and got hurt. Right, so you actually see tenacity, responsibility, bravery, ferocity. Right? And does our imagination and practice of democracy include new immigrants and racial minorities? They put down their housework to protect the students. They occupy until the end, but got booed by happy birthday crowds due to their accents, because people who thought new immigrants or people from China are anti-Occupy. So when they hear her accent, they actually sing the happy birthday song to her, right, as a form of protest. So now another issue, moving fast, right? Where the hell did they get those facial masks? You actually see women domesticating public space, bringing their sense of entitlement and belonging by their everyday habitation of public space time. And the greatest example is obviously the public toilets, right? Which I call the princess boudoir. And here you also see the character of Hong Kong women. They are tiger moms and very bossy Kong sisters, right? And they make sure with their pose it, you know exactly how to use your facials and you know how to use your wipes and so on, right? And then, of course, it's boring. So people do a lot of other things with their time, like their fingernails. And of course, right, making yourself at home like nowhere else, the chartered study room. And with entitlement comes responsibility. And these are the, hot pan ladies doing the work they would never do at home. Right? And she admits it, right? She used to be politically apathetic, but here, right, she comes here to do the trash every day after school. And that's what really touches people, right? The most loving, most touching, most memorable moments sometimes are done by women when people wake up and see breakfast right next to their tent, right? And the new keywords really of this generation of post-80s and 90s is community, commitment, communication, collaboration. I can't say more about that, but let me move on. Who do you go to if you substitute your misery, for example, quarreled with your parents because of umbrella occupy? There you go, umbrella papa mama. So they organize themselves, and obviously by designing the logo that way, you know the papa didn't do it, right? And so on. And also there are ecological holistic scale of caring by our deep green recyclers who call themselves scavengers. And my friend Yating, right? She makes what you call enzyme cleaning material from the fruit skin, and then our rice boxes, foam boxes. She take the foam apart and make pillows for everyone over there, and so on. Right? So you actually see there's sensitivity to people there, empathy, and it turns into creativity and all sorts of ingenuity. Right? And a very sophisticated, well-organized recycling center. And also, I call the 3 Gs of Causeway Bay Mobile Democracy Classroom. You don't see them. They work at the back of everything. But these 3 women were there on the scene, on site, every single day of Occupy, running the Mobile Democracy Classroom. Okay. And of course, Ho Sisi, right, our star, deploying her cultural capital all the way. And she might actually, go into the elections and so on. And some of our younger student leaders, like Yvonne here, Agnes, and Willis Ho over here, right? Well-groomed Amazon. She tidies her hair, puts on a mask, and then charges ahead. And Bo Xinji, Chong Chongji, I don't know how to translate that, right? But then this is really how we turn our most everyday objects into, who would thought of that, right? Into useful things in the movement. And also, instead of 紅顏禍水, you have 紅顏甘露and 太陽花, right? When it was really hot, these young women sprayed water into the crowd. And I was hearing all these young men joking, oh, she's getting all of us so wet. And teenage girls at the front line confronting the police. And of course, us. Academic women organizing. And we are also, as Katrine said, part of the Mobile Democracy Classroom. We have organized over 500 classes so far, and still continuing every Saturday and into the communities. And it's quite thrilling, actually, to teach like that. And I did one of those, and other women as well. And we are bored, so we create. So you actually see humor, creativity, a lot of humanity, and we actually see women artists right here in the audience. And from everybody, whether you're an artist or not, is making art, right? It's part of this whole participatory performance. And the otherworldly, besides being humane, and the humor in all these Guernsey ideas, right? And, okay, good. Now, okay, let me jump to this. Katrine also said something about the Defend Lester Alex Occupy Mount Wusan Hee group. Well, I studied the literature and the kutsu they made online, right? So it's really the sexualizing the movement. It's imaginary cultural productions, and this is the work you see these women do. Pretty good, right? And it borrows from this Japanese tradition, Fuloi tradition. But our Hong Kong version is much more innocent, let's say, like this, and every scene it's reproduced, right? Okay, and of course, 光明磊落, that's it.
very interesting image.
You can stay there if you want.
So good afternoon, everyone. Sorry that I don't have any lovely pictures or interesting PowerPoint slides to show you. But like, I don't know how to really investigate into women's participation in a sociological perspective. But I'll just share a bit on my personal experience of joining the movement, being a girl. Like the professors talks about creativity of women. They talk about how women try to locate themselves in this movement. But what I would like to focus on would be, of course, some of my personal experience, and also how women are going to prolong this movement, how they are going to bring the movement into another stage. So basically, as you could see, I was the only single female student representative in the talks, and only Auntie Carrie and me were were the female speakers in the talk. So basically, some of the media also tried to highlight on our gender, and they often ask me the question, for you being a girl, do you feel any difficulties or special things that you could feel throughout the movement? Well, actually, I didn't really think there's any special things I encounter simply because of my gender. But I would say for some of the scenes I experienced in, actually, maybe they are somehow related to my gender because I have extra protection from other occupiers who think they are very muscular, and we try to protect every teenager girls or ladies when there are potential dangers happening. For example, I stationed in Mongkok, as some of you might have observed, and maybe according to the general understanding, Mongkok should be one of the most dangerous occupation areas among the three, because there are news reports covering that Mongkok is actually having the largest number of incidents or movement actions. But actually, I encountered the most easygoing people there, because they are very caring when they see me as a girl, and sometimes they will treat me as a like middle person between the federation and the different groups of occupiers, because when the federation started to station in Mongkok, it was already like in the middle of the movement, and being a girl brought me some convenience into like getting along with the people. And also another thing that maybe related to my gender is that how the blue ribbons or some of the anti-occupiers, they try to demonize me. Some of them attack on my appearance, like the pimples on my face, and some may use vile language that are related to like sexual assaults when they try to like demonize me on the internet. However, I think women are actually playing a very special role, not only during the movement, but even after the occupation, when I am in contact with some of them on how to organize the district works. Well, frankly speaking, there are only a very, very little number of female who have expressed their intention of running in the subsequent district council election. But many of them have expressed their interest in helping out in the promotional work, in the like election campaigns. And actually, I could observe something very special about them, which is the wide variety of topics that are related to social issues and different aspects of life we encounter every day. Like some of them are housewives. They may not have stayed in the occupation area for long because they need to take care of their children at home. However, they are really, really familiar with the educational policies in Hong Kong. And they teach me why people are moving into some of the districts in Hong Kong, particularly because they want to get their children into some famous schools, and how that is related to the unfairness of the government policies. And some of them know about long working hours and the lack of protections policies to the laborers. And some of them are, of course, like decision makers who did decision makings and suggested directions in the movement. So they also gave really good ideas on evaluating the movement. And some of them knows about child care, like where they can get milk powder, and they could update us on the situation of milk powders in Hong Kong. And some of them are really familiar with retirement policies because they get parents and like parents-in-law to take care of in the families. So these are all characteristics of women that I observed when I cooperate with them after the occupation. And sometimes you could see them really trying very hard to strike a balance between their family responsibilities and getting out to help. But every one of them actually tried their very best. Like maybe as a teenage girl, I still could not feel how stressed they are when they really tried very, very hard to squeeze every minute they have to engage in the movement. As a student, I may not feel the pressure they have. I may not feel the differences in like myself and other male student leaders because I just feel the same. I also am studying in the university and they're doing the same. But maybe when they are bearing some more responsibilities, like their work, like in the family, actually they are having much more pressure than I am having. And I really respect every woman who participated in the movement. And this is the end of my address, but I'm sorry that I could not join the panel discussion that will follow because I have to leave for another meeting. But thank you so much for your participation.
Hi. Yeah, this is Fermi. In fact, I shouldn't accept the invitation by Pooja because, I do not really adopt gender perspective, for what, and I participate in a civil society. Just, I see myself as a citizen. So just naturally that, okay, I'm Hong Konger, I'm a citizen. I never really, because I'm a woman, so I do this and do that. It's not really, not the right person. But so I'm just going to share, some moments that remind me that there are differences between men and women. Okay, what I did, I was one of the volunteers for the Occupy Central with Love and Peace. And what I have done is quite silly. For example, I wrote to Time Magazine to appeal for them if they could nominate Hong Kong people as the People of the Year. And I also wrote to Nobel Prize that if they can accept our application nomination. And I tried to lobby some EXCO members to resign so as to create any pressure or impact to the Hong Kong government. And or they will try to persuade the government to reopen the civic square. But these things, nothing, to do with whether I'm a woman or man, that is quite natural. But one thing, of course, that maybe is more, women would do is I cook soup and I cook some Chinese herbal tea for Benny Tai because he lost his voice. And also some volunteers could not sleep well. And I feel quite, sympathetic that, okay, maybe you have to take care of yourself. But when I cook soup or Chinese herbal tea, of course, I wasn't, aware that it's very women job. No, I just like out of love and care. So, in fact, during the whole movement, I did appreciate the different good attributes or qualities, of women and men. For example, you can see just Miss Sito, just, show us that, how caring, sensitive, empathy, that the women, they cook soup, prepare food, and a lot of creativity. All those I really appreciate. But on the other hand, of course, we also notice that, you can see from those anti-occupation parties that they use different tactics to stop you, to participate. For example, for men, they use physical violence. But for women, they will more use the sexual violence or harassment. That because, that is the most fearful tactic, right, against women. And that I can tell the differences. Okay, so and then there are some moments that really make me aware that, okay, women and men are different. Okay, the first instance was that, Long Waldo, on the 3rd of November, the Student Federation called for surrounding the CE office and the CGO. I was one of them. And then, we were gathered, at the Long Waldo. And of course, it was very tense that, between police and the protester. And in one moment, I suddenly, pushed my husband in front of me. And I hide myself behind him. And at the time, my thought was that maybe I'm not as strong as my husband. So, and I didn't want to get hurt. So at the time, just very simple. But suddenly I heard, some men shout, okay, protect the girls, protect the women. And I thought, okay, yeah, quite sensible. But suddenly I heard, quite loud and a bit angry voice from girls. Why should you protect me? You see, we are equal. 我哋一樣啫嘛. Okay, I'm just as strong as you. You guys don't try to protect me. And I really, why I did not have such response? Because I felt quite okay. Because I already hide myself behind my husband. But how come that young girls cry? They said, no, we don't need your protection. So in terms of protection, I mean, sometimes, we refer to physical strength. But, when I look to the moms, I also see that it's a protection. Especially when I talk to many of the moms under the umbrella, Sana Bama. I seldom, meet with the Baba. Usually I only see those mama, where, taking care of the youth, the children, and which, I really appreciate. I did not see that is abusive of women quality or attributes that I rather appreciate that is, out of love, and we are quite used to do it, quite positive. I take it as quite positive way. And that is one. Another is, of course, is to make me feel much more aware of the gender inequality. It's because, I've been served ethnic minorities in Hong Kong, mainly South Asians, Pakistani, Indian, Nepali. And during the movement, we have a group of local-born young girls and young boys, mainly from Nepalese, Pakistani, and India. From the first day, the 28th of September, they took part in it. And at the early days, they were in a group to cheer up people. Maybe some of you saw them that, they just touring around 3 occupation zones, MOT to one side, and then Causeway Bay, and then Mong Kok. And they were well received. Like, okay, you are real Hong Kongers, they feel very encouraging that, you know, it seems that for them it was the first time that they're being accepted as part of Hong Kong. And I see the integration and also the mutual respect there, and also we appreciate the diversity. However, you know, after 1 or 2 weeks, some of the Pakistani in the group, I mean in the same group, they say, oh, Fermi, something want to discuss with you. I say, okay, what? So would you please ask some Pakistani girls, they wear in just like modern way, I mean very decently, like, you know, the modern way. They say, okay, can you suggest them to wear in a Muslim costume? I said, but she never wear in that, in a Muslim costume. But some boys said that, oh, look, because, you know, we already have many gossip and pressure from our community that they saw some of the South Asian girls on media. It attract quite a lot of feature and reporting in media. And I said, but you have to respect, you know, the girls. And I refused to talk to the girl. I said, because, you know, the way they are, and also we know each other for many years. And then, you know, that is their way. But the boys, you know, they try to talk to the girls. They, okay, would you please dress in a Muslim, but traditional way, and also cover your face? Because many people see you, and that may affect your future. What kind of future? Of course, the choice of husband. Not because people will see that you are not that, you know, not traditional enough, not good. And some of the girls refused. Some of the girls withdraw because, you know, too much pressure. And because, you know, few girls, they insist, you know, the way they are. No, because, you know, I never, in their whole life, never wear in their, like, traditional dress, you know, going outside. And they said that, you know, I'm so sorry, I know I won't, you know, take your suggestion, but I will continue to take part in it. Then some Pakistani withdraw. Boys, they said, no, then I will not longer, you know, go out with you. Because, you know, they also receive pressure, some calling from their so-called community leaders to their parents that, okay, I see your boy or that girl, those girl, you mean in a negative way. Those, you know, he hang around with those not decent girls. Then they withdraw. So, you know, I really feel it's very hard for our ethnic minority women to take part in this kind of social movement. Some of the boys also, you know, they face pressure and stress, you know, from their parents. But the parents use different reasons. For example, you know, for boys, they will say, oh, look, we are ethnic minorities. And here's Chinese society. So you better not to take part in it, otherwise you will have trouble. But for girls, they don't use this kind of reason. They will use, you know, because you're girls. And then for your future, and for our family honor and face, you better not going outside. So you can see the reasons are different because of the gender, right? And also the tactics also, you know, are different. So, you know, for me, those moments really make me feel, you know, that the inequality still exists, is even more serious in the, you know, of course, you know, in nowadays, you know, I mean, so that even in the, I thought it's a civil social movement, but still, you know, very much significant to some part of, you know, females. So, this is, another is, you know, during the currents on the MOT, and I was about to sit down also on that day, but I did not, because, you know, there are two mama to under the umbrella, Sana Mama. They face a very, very difficult dilemma. They wanted to sit down, but they can't. And then they told me, they said, oh, well, because of my job nature, it's a marketing. And also, you know, my company says that, you know, we are political neutral. I don't want you to be too political active, something like that. And they want to sit down so as, you know, to protect the students and also to show their support that, we are with you. But they can't. I said, is it only because of job? And then we talk for 1 hour, just in the station that the police, are copying your ID number for 1 hour. And after the discussion end up, the ladies, 2 ladies, they admit that, one of them said that if I were a man, maybe I will less, consideration, I will less burden. That, I have to look after of my children. I will not face my in-laws, pressure. And that, they suddenly realize that, because, of course, it's because of my job nature. But another part is because I'm a woman. So that's why I have less free. They said that I'm less, free to do it, that whether I want to sit down or go home. So, and those moments, remind me, yes, for women, taking part in politics, or we so-called public matters, social movements. Some of the women, they need to pay, double effort and to overcome a lot of pressure because of the gender issue. Okay, so this is my sharing. Thank you.
Right, thank you very, very much to all the panelists for a most fascinating insight into the role of women in Hong Kong's Occupy movement. I would just like to take a few minutes to share a few reflections of my own on the movement and women's involvement, and then I'll offer some reflections on some of the material shared by our panelists, and then we'll open up for discussion to the floor. Hong Kong Occupy has been distinct in many ways in the sense that generally in Hong Kong, we never really think about the gender dimension of political participation. And oftentimes we see women are just as active, if not even more active than men across a range of political causes. And so it's important to highlight the beginnings of different and varied reactions to the involvement of women in the Occupy movement from quite early on, as we saw a lot of publicity pertaining to how the movement would go and what everybody was to do and where it might kick off and things like that. You started to notice that people began having conversations with their peers and family members about, are you going to go to Occupy? And what time are you going to go? And, oh, I've heard they've opened up a new site in Mong Kok, should we go there? And things like that. And as they reflected on what they could do as part of the movement, the women of Occupy straddled different categories. You had those who didn't consider themselves as women per se, but simply saw themselves as citizens who were there to contribute to the cause and to rise up and fight for universal suffrage, which they considered to be their equal right. They were fighting for the democratic cause, and gender had nothing to do with it. They were equally involved across all phases of the movement in strategizing and executing various steps. And of course, as you see, Yvonne, being one of the student leaders herself, also saw gender as no barrier or of no particular significance in terms of her delivery of the goals of the movement. But many young women did report, from my observations and to those women who sort of consulted with me personally, that they faced different kinds of pressures to stay distant from the movement and to sort of limit their participation to particular types of activities. And so in that sense, they faced a pressure not to participate as fully as they might as equal citizens in exercising their rights to freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, so they were asked to stay clear of certain venues because there might be trouble brewing over there. So many family members advised girls to stay away due to the possibility that the sheer size of the protests might cause, pose threats to them or their bodies. And many male members of the family offered either to accompany their girls or simply asked the daughters or the wives not to go along. Many students I counseled particularly raised this concern that their parents expressed fear for their safety, for their future, and how they may find it difficult to, have a girlfriend or get married. For the women, those concerns were more pressing. There were usages of terms such as honor and shame and the family face, and how relatives might react to their involvement, and they might be seen to become radicalized, and how this is unbecoming conduct for a young woman. All of these notions were routinely tabled and bandied about to dissuade women from participating more actively. And these pressures, of course, intensified as we started to hear of reports pertaining to sexual assault, intimidation, and harassment at the different sites. On the one hand, it was a testament to the bravery of some of the women who insisted that they needed no special protection and they would stay there regardless of what was happening. On the other hand, there were women who reported that they were happy and pleased to have the protection of, some of their male fellow occupiers so that they can steer clear of gender. These tactics are not new. We've seen them, routinely be used, for example, in the Arab Spring, in Russia, and in other places where women have used their bodies in order to contribute to the ongoing public discourse and to attract attention to their cause. Of course, the distinction here was that women's bodies were being deliberately targeted with a view to excluding them from the public space, which they reclaimed, regardless of the pressures and the threats. Also interesting is the police neglect of the complaints and the reaction to women's complaints, where some protesters, some anti-Occupy people said that the women were there at their own risk. They knew what was coming, especially after reports emerged, and that if they expected not to be assaulted, then they simply shouldn't participate in the movement. It was interesting that the expectation wasn't that the police should protect you because you're an equal citizen under the law and you're entitled to equal protection. So from an equality perspective, this highlights how law enforcement, or the lack of it in this situation, has been used to create fear and to exclude women from public spaces to which they have an entitlement. And women's bodies are routinely utilized in this manner, as, again, Fermi's reflections on the involvement of ethnic minority women also highlights that they were asked to dress in a particular way if they were intending on participating, failing which again, notions of family and honor and cultural sort of barriers were raised. Faith was also raised in order to get the women to think more about where their loyalties lay. And I think that theme has been highlighted repeatedly across what the different panelists have talked about, where women are demonstrably torn between the different loyalties they hold or the responsibilities they have. Men do not necessarily need to think as actively about their political expression, participation, the consequences of their activities as much as women who have families or who have parents who have particular viewpoints. They seem to be shouldering the burden of ensuring that they conform with the traditional stereotype of what a woman should do and deliver, or she has to straddle both spheres. If she wants to be political, she still has to fulfill the personal. And that, I think, is a very interesting and important and significant dimension of women's politicking to think about and consider how this poses a barrier to, or sometimes even enables the strengthening of a woman's resolve to contribute to such movements, especially such an important movement pertaining to universal suffrage in Hong Kong. From Katrine's discussion, we saw how the power of shock value and creativity of different forms of activism involving feminist symbols can create new languages to contribute to this discourse and empower those in the movement to attract attention to their cause. We also saw how this the use of different languages also enables the cross-fertilization of different dialogues and different causes. And as Katrine highlighted, that different voices emerged, including those relating to the LGBT movement as a result of the use of particular symbols. And it allows us to reflect on how these might be utilized in the future pertaining to different causes that women might rise up against, or different groups might rise up against, in fact. Letta highlighted the struggle involved in pursuit of women's rights in China and how Hong Kong can serve itself as a very important and significant platform, given that we do have many of the freedoms that our Chinese counterpart activists do not. And it is also very telling that she highlighted that the true fight for emancipation of women in China is deeply threatening to the Communist Party. And I think that this threat is something that is very, well, it's emerging in Hong Kong's consciousness more clearly now as we see Beijing crack down on the different range of rights that we have and the things that you can do, and the subtle sort of nature of some of the threats pertaining to academic freedom, freedom of assembly. I can say, for example, that even, the Center for Comparative Public Law, some of our colleagues have had their email accounts hacked on account of, being involved with perceived pro-democracy forces and receiving funds that we weren't due in order to fuel the Occupy movement. This theme of women and their involvement in the public sphere as being threatening is played out in Hong Kong in the context of the sexual assaults and the reports that we heard about, and also the kind of pressures that women faced at home when they were not able to participate as fully because they had to look after the family or cook, or their husband simply wouldn't like their involvement. So this is precisely why we need to recognize the significance of the platform that Hong Kong might offer to different women's movements, not just in China, but I also think in Asia we have similar pressures about women in activism and the sort of subtle pressures they face to be more curtailed in their expression of their views. Mariana's presentation highlighted the full spectrum of women from young to old and the numerous attributes that they brought to the movement. And she highlighted how women reclaimed the public space and claimed belonging and displayed responsibility, played a more nurturing role, and created a sense of community. And you see the emergence of umbrella mamas and papas, and as Fermi as well said, that this was one of the roles that she quite comfortably played because this is something that came naturally. And this sort of highlights the distinct and creative ways in which women can involve themselves despite the numerous barriers that we tend to face in terms of equal participation in the political and public space. And it constitutes, I think, it reflects how the movement serves as a political awakening for women, and to realize that they have power regardless of the barriers that they might face, and they can bring their own skills and talents to contribute in whichever way, because all of those means are meaningful in order to help sustain the movement, which many of the women highlighted on the slides clearly did. It's very refreshing to hear Yvonne's perspective on what she learned about the knowledge and the street smartness of the women that she talked to on a district level. And it also highlights again that people need to realize and open up new spaces for women to converse so that they can participate in all of these issues which clearly impact their livelihoods on a day-to-day basis. It is also very telling that, as Yvonne said, she felt that she was the focus or the target of a type of feminization of politics because a lot of attention was paid to her physical appearance. And I mean, I think it cut both ways. There were, I think from her fan pages, there were people who branded her, beauty with brains. But then there were others who sought to demonize her in order to dissuade her from being so politically active. But of course, we're very pleased that none of these kind of characterizations have had an impact on her willingness to continue her participation. And I think Fermi's perspective, given her involvement in the fight for racial equality, really highlights something very distinct, which we only have sort of seen the beginning of in this movement, and that is the desire of minority communities to participate in political movements in Hong Kong and to belong, and to attempt to do so in whatever means that they can. And so the ethnic minority group, carried a poster and tried to cheer up the crowds throughout the different nights. And there too, you can see that there were constantly confrontations at the very personal level with peer pressure from families and people. I know from the Nepalese community, the parents are very unhappy about their offspring participating because they felt that the pro-establishment camp may withdraw the kind of support that they give them from time to time because they would see their children as sort of standing up against the authorities. And of course, the Muslim girls who very much wanted to participate also found it extremely difficult to make the kind of choices that they had to. All in all, I think that the reflections reveal the many challenges and the cleavages pertaining to women's involvement in political movements in Hong Kong, even though we're an advanced society, even though we have rule of law and the rights that we do. there is a lot of work to be done in order to create spaces to ensure that women can have an equal voice in participating in, and as Gina mentioned, in running for office, standing for office, and to obtain the kind of support that they need in order to have their voices heard and to be seen as publicly, politically entitled to be in power. And I think the Occupy movement is just the beginning of what kind of vision women activists can have for their role in society and its future.
Shall we open it up for a discussion now? Okay. If you have a question, could you raise your hand and we'll have a microphone come around? And let me know if you could identify to whom your question is addressed. And
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed all of the talks. My question's addressed actually to many of you, okay, not to one in particular. But it struck me as I was listening to the talks that there seems to be two models of engagement for women in public activism. One seemed to be more online, and that seemed to be more radical and boundaries pushing, particularly in the naked activism. The other seems to follow more of the framework of nurturing, taking care of those who are there, cooking soup, etc. And I'm curious, is it important that one is online, the other one is in public space? Does that tell us something about the forms of activism that women feel comfortable doing based on the location that they're in? I'm also wondering to what degree perhaps the women activists feel pressured to engage in activism that seems to adhere to particular gender stereotypes, nurturing, etc. And I also, this is a sort of different question. I wonder to what extent by focusing more exclusively on that latter kind of activism, in a sense, perhaps naturalizes that particular kind of engagement instead of pushing women to challenge boundaries and perhaps engage in ways that might not fit this natural idea of nurturing, taking care of the more active male participants. So thank you very much.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say something quickly, that I don't think these spaces can be separated, actually. Like, for instance, there's the occupied zones, and then there's the social media spaces, and I think they're really fairly well integrated, or you can think of them as being integrated as well. Like, the people, of course, in the occupied zones are constantly checking social media and living their lives there according to what's going on in social media, what's being highlighted, and so on. That's one thing. But also, what I think I'm trying to think about more, and also when I listen to Miran, I think, and the way she's creating new metaphors to understand this generation, then is it the case that these zones provided a kind of alternate reality almost? So you go to this reality, to this zone, and then you can live out your daily life a little bit differently from your other spaces. So this alternate reality is being played out on the streets as well as in social media. So it doesn't matter so much whether you're doing taboo-breaking stuff like nudity, which you can only do online or you get arrested most of the time, or you're actually obsessively cleaning garbage, which you don't do at home either. This is equally boundary-breaking, actually, behavior. So I wonder if that's actually what's going on in the zones, and how we can then also keep working on that, keep finding ways of living our realities like that. And that's why I think feminism is actually crucial. And I think Mirana was saying that also, and also in the previous symposium at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. So maybe you can say a bit more about it too, about this question.
I think it's very transformative for women in this movement because they actually need to break a lot of boundaries to do all sorts of things. And also, one of the hardest boundaries to break is the digital divide. And I think being on site helps. A lot of aunties and grandmas actually got onto WhatsApp and so on because they're in the camps with the kids. And this is very liberating for a lot of them. And also the camps are a very liberating alternate space. Imagine what people do in those camps at night. And what they can't do because there's no noise barrier in the camps, they go online to do. And that's why, and also about the breaking, there are also other experiences of breaking the sexual or gender boundary. And that is how much more women are able to express their sexualities and desires. And it's like in this very private public, right? It's a group on Facebook. You feel like you're with a sympathetic community, but then it's also extremely public, right? That you actually play out those desires. And imagining, your idols like Alex and Nesta as he, it's actually cutting in many ways the boundaries. First of all, your boyfriend can't say much because you're imagining them as gay, right? As he, anyways. And this, and it's also several distances away from really doing it. But nonetheless, it's very disturbingly sexualized. And if you actually read the literature they write and also the visual art they make, and so instead of, and in a sense, this is also sexual harassment, right? Although the guys are taking it very, very nicely, generously, right? But so, in fact, I think more boundaries are being broken than you think.
Okay, next question.
Yes, thank you very much to all the panel for their contributions to what's a really important and, as was demonstrated by all the contributions, very complicated, complex question. I wanted to pick up a couple of points, one that Katrine made and also that Fermi was making, about the possible connections between women's involvement in the Occupy movement and other movements and political causes, as well as the multiple pressures that those involved felt, particularly women in the movement, and raised the question and the issue of class. Because I haven't been in Hong Kong for very long, and one of the things that is very striking is the number of domestic workers, domestic helpers that are employed in the city. And I wondered if anyone on the panel could reflect on the extent to which that cohort, that class of women who face particular vulnerabilities and precariousness because of their employment and immigration status, to what extent they were involved or should have been involved or were precluded from being involved because of their class status as well as their gender. Thank you.
For every minorities, communities, we have different groups. The one I serve is the local Westerners, just like, they have all citizens' entitlement and right. Another is the domestic helpers. Well, there is a small group, it's refugee and asylum seekers. And we notice, from some news that, the anti-occupation parties pro-establishment, they use, why I use the use, they pay some refugee, to anti the movement. Why I know, they call me, ask me whether they should take part of it. But it's very practical, like 1,000 a day. And for refugee, it's a huge sum. They told me, they said, okay, look, we don't have any money. So yes, you're right. It's the socioeconomic status, the class issue. That despite some of them, like some domestic helpers, also they say, I don't want to be involved. Or some of the Filipino ladies, they told me that they support democracy because, their country already enjoy the full democracy. But they said, my boss, my owner, forced me to sign the anti-Occupy Central Movement. And that, again, is about the class, the job security. And we do have, these issues complaint. But I find, it's really difficult because, people use their vulnerability, I would say. And they find no choice. That it's very difficult to say no. We have some domestic helpers one day on the street, they just line up to sign. And then I said, do you know what are you signing for? They said, no. But people told me there is support democracy. I said, no, there is anti-democracy. They said, oh, really? Oh, then this is another issue. It's about the language in information. Right? It's not only for other, they participate in the Wali. Those are forced to. And then, but another positive thing is that, we have the local Filipino ladies, they are housewife, or some of them, they told me that, they before they didn't or not really interested in the local politics. But because of the movement that, they pay more attention to the local news. And then, they are quite interested, to know more about the movement. And end up, they said they build more stronger of identity. Like, the sense of belonging, which, they never have, this feeling. Even though some of the ladies, they said they not yet able to take part, like, step out. But we have some Pakistani lady, Filipino ladies, they cook curry and food, and then, ask the volunteers to send to the occupation zones. And then for them, they see as a contribution that to the movement as a Hong Kong citizen. And that is very meaningful for them. So, you talk about caste, socio-economic status. Yes, it does affect, to certain groups, especially refugees and domestic helpers.
Can I just add one point? When you're talking about class differences, there's also the political or geographical differences. So the mainlanders coming to Hong Kong, there are certainly many hundreds of thousands of them who actually saw the protests. And a lot of them, they had a tremendously profound reaction. And yet, a lot of these mainlanders, when they return across the border, may very well be arrested. And there are some pretty horrifying examples of that having happened. So there are many reasons that prevented people who wanted to take part in the protests openly from doing so.
I also read in the surveys, right, that the people with professions that can afford to go to the occupied zones are obviously people with higher education level, and also the job hours are actually shorter than the service industry, grassroots. Right? So there are only 6% service industry grassroots participants in the movement, and obviously they can't. They need their job. They need to work 12, 14 hours a day, and that prevented them from coming to the zones.
Hi, this is a great panel. I'm really looking forward to the next one. My question isn't directed at anyone in particular, but I'm just wondering if you can help me out from an academic point of view. I'm struggling to explain to foreign visitors why it is that the Taiwan Sunflower Movement has created a male star, Lin Feifan. The Hong Kong Occupy Movement has created 3 male stars. And as we saw earlier in this panel discussion, they are, the subjects of erotic fantasies and so on and so on. So why isn't Yvonne a subject of those same fantasies and the same, crazy fans chasing her around phenomenon? I know it's nothing to do with looks. She's a very attractive young lady, and Joshua Wong, bless him, is not your typical mode of a Casanova, right? So can you explain to me from your experience and studies, academic studies of gender roles and also activism around the world, why we are seeing this difference? Thank you very much.
Let me give it a shot. There are also large followings for Agnes Chow and Willis Ho. And I think it's also because of the roles they play. Right? I think the two boys are given a lot of the microphone roles, but a lot of the really power jobs, right? Strategy, decision, negotiation, and are done by a lot of these young women who everybody can't resist talking to and listening to. And I think it's a lot to do with some of them, because these young women are also, even Joshua, because they're more experienced. They're actually taking the backstage more this time. But if you go online, it's a huge following. And thinking of previous movements, there are also a lot of Noisan, right? Coming, Manchu Noisan coming out of the movements. And also in Golden Brothers, there's actually a list of women they wanted most to undress. And quite a lot of the women had large followings over there. But then I think it has to, my gut feeling is that the media, it's very, very far behind, right, than the people. I think the crowds, the people are far more gender balanced than our mainstream media, and they just pick the wrong stories.
I also want to add something academically from an academic background, since I have to do, since you asked that. No, I think this whole movement where people sexualize the male leaders, or we can even call it some kind of sexual harassment, or counter-sexual harassment of the male icons, as a subculture that is also very huge. It just so happens to be that Hong Kong and Taiwan are definitely the centers of this fad, which is a whole different subculture, the boys love subculture. And it's also, it happened the same in the sunflower movement too, that this was happening, right? And so it just was a kind of cross-fertilization of these two kind of movements that are going on at the same time, that I don't think it would have been the same in other countries, maybe because there isn't this pop culture of fashion to start with. And maybe if you feel like there, you can also be critical of that, of course. Why not positively eroticize women? Why kind of make fun or queer men as a kind of eroticism? I think this is the same criticism that you can, expose the BL fandom to as well. Why are BL fans so kind of stuck on homosexual fantasies? Why can't they, positively eroticize femininity? That's a lot of debate there as well, actually. So it also comes from that, I think, because the BL fandom is huge, and this is true, and this is also like, it's bigger than the movement, perhaps. It has a very long history and so on. So it just seems to come together here in some interesting way. And yes, you can also be critical of that. Maybe it will pass on. Maybe the next phase, women will realize that they need to more positively eroticize femininity and or other types of queerness. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. My question, I'm Dan Garrett from City University of Hong Kong. I'm a PhD student there. I was out every day during Umbrella at most of the different sites, predominantly Mongkok and Admiralty. And one of my observations, my curiosity is this, is we've talked about the role of women in the ideological and the rhetorical front. But nobody's really talked so much about the front line, the manning of barricades, first responders at the first aid stations, actually being on the lines of the confrontations in Long Wu, at Mongkok, the recovery of Mongkok, and so forth like that. I'm a photographer, and I record and document a lot of this. So I found it very amazing. Very small, not just women, but also males, standing up to the police at the front line, and being willing to take the violence coming from there. So that would be my one question is have you talked to, or what are the reasons for the role choices that people made? Are the ones that took the front lines, at the barricades, the first responders, are they more from the riot girl type of perspective, or are they a different type of feminism? And then my second question would be, the blue ribbons or the pro-establishment have made a strategic habit of using women to attack the yellow ribbons and to attack some of the other ideological groups. If you look at the pressure, like the Voice of Loving Hong Kong, Hong Kong Youth Caring Association, when they attack the Falun Gong or some of these other groups, you see a couple guys there, but predominantly it's women that are involved in the confrontations. Why is that? Thank you.
I don't know. Pooja, would you like to take that?
I think that's a great question. And what I can say is, in response to your first question, I had several students who were battling with issues of physique and whether they had the stamina to sort of be frontline people. And they were actively discussing with the community that they had formed where they would be best placed. And I think there was a lot of strategizing involved. And so it's not really accurate, I think, to say that you would have the more radical or riot type women up manning the front lines. I think they really made a concerted effort to place people where they would perform best, where they wouldn't buckle under the pressure. Because I think, especially for people who were visiting or frequenting the zones every day, there was a tremendous amount of stress and pressure involved, especially at the front line. And I think the students, at least the ones I spoke to, were wise enough to think about their limits and their levels of tolerance and how far they were willing to go. And there were certainly those who stepped up and say that I'm going to die doing this if this is what I do every single day, and it doesn't matter what happens to me because this is just too important for my future. And these were mostly boys who weren't of a particularly strong frame physically, but they were just so resolute and determined that they insisted on manning the front lines, and so they were there. The women, I would have to say, mostly found themselves relegated to manning supplies or managing the first aid station because they felt that they were very good first responders to any crisis that emerged. And especially, I think, for the mamas of the Occupy movement, they were there and ready to counsel any of the youngsters who felt threatened or simply felt overwhelmed and were emotional after any of the particular the challenges and threats that they faced on the front lines. So I think it was more deliberate and strategized, and I would say it accords with common sense, especially since they didn't know how long the movement was going to last. As to your second question, I think, again, that's a very, very important observation, and my hunch is that the strategic use of women is precisely because there is recognition in the fact that if you retaliate in an inappropriate manner against a woman who is threatening you, then you bring shame to the movement. So I think a lot of it was to do with rhetoric and the framing of what was going on, and leaving it to the media to pick up on whichever fight and whatever angle they wanted to present to the broader public, and leaving it to chance as an opportunity to shame the Occupy leaders particularly. And as you know, there were many attempts made at trying to create confrontation deliberately. And I think this was just one very strategic use of women, because you know that there's only certain ways in which you could expect the occupiers to respond to the women without risking the reputation that they had now acquired for being peaceful and loving.
Could I follow up on your question too, because it's a question that we haven't talked about as a panel. What about the opposition? There are many women on the opposition who are highly visible, and we only had Auntie Carrie mentioned today. And I was wondering if any of you would like to comment on the kind of rhetoric or imagery used to portray women in the establishment camp, beyond just the tactical use, which I of course recognize.
Quite a lot of demonizing in the first place, but also one of the more remarkable women was when the Blue Ribbons started, and they had this big rally to start, and the woman really speaking on the mic was Mrs. Heng Wa-sing, right? who's the wife of a famous godfather. Mm-hmm. So So women gangster boss because her husband just passed away. So she's actually boss. And so you actually see where the money comes from and so on. One thing I observed.
I also observed a profile in the South China Morning Post about a woman, and I don't know too much about her, but her name is Letitia Lee, and she was also campaigning already for a while against, she had an anti-vulgarity campaign, for instance, going on before the movement came along, which I thought was really interesting. So she was portrayed as highly puritanical, for instance. And I think that is also, for instance, something that I have studied about mainland China, like in the war on pornography. They're also hiring mothers, for instance, to go through the internet and spy on vulgarity materials. I don't know exactly why they have to be mothers. Maybe mothers are more, you know, prone to spot these kind of vulgar materials or to get angered by them, or but this is definitely a common profile, I think. And so I guess, yeah, I don't know exactly why this is happening, but I was also thinking that it's very curious that you know, the anti-occupying women are also anti-vulgarity or anti-erotic and so on. So I thought that was, yeah, that backs up our theory that the movement is erotic, I suppose, as an erotic side to it.
Because, you know, the Oi Gong Lik, you know, the Love Hong Kong Power, Chen Jing Sam, one of the lady, their group, you know, quite regularly, you know, protest, you know, sometimes at the MOT, and a group of ladies mixed with the local, I believe the local lady, and some maybe new arrival or from China even, I'm not so sure, because, you know, some of them even in one occasion, one lady, you know, could not figure out that whether MOT is, you know, MTR station, which MTR station can go to MOT. In fact, they were already in MOT. And then they just call, where am I? I said MOT. And then, okay, and then, you know, the group, went to, you know, the Taiwan Baptist Church few times, and then I was one of the volunteers, you know, go there to entertain them. That, you know, okay, because they said that, okay, they would call up the church want to submit their protest, you know, that, you know, refugee that should go home, something like that, to criticize to the church. And then all the occasions, and then all are the ladies. Most of them were ladies. And then I really want to ask them, why? Is there any, what political views or, you know, any reason that, you know, they want to you know, Hong Kong people for pursuing the democracy. And also because in particular, in one occasion was, you know, the after school, the kindergarten after school, which I feel very bad. I say, okay, look, there is only children, K1 to K3. And then why you do your protest here? That, you know, nothing to do with the children, small kids. And then, but at that time, you know, all the ladies around 8 to 10, my impression was that they were not allowed to talk. Because, you know, they cover up, and I tried to film. I said, okay, let's take a good picture. Because, you know, that what you're doing, I believe that you think is right? And correct. So let's have a good photo. But they hide themselves. Only 1 or 2 women leaders, they, you know, they read out the statement and also, you know, shout to the staff of the church. But for other ladies, you know, I tried to take a photo. I say, okay, look, you know, just look at me. I will film you very beautiful. But they just, you know, hide themselves and feel the impression like, you know, very shameful. And then I really try. I say, okay, can you tell me why? Is it because you are paid for it, or you really have a different view, or what? But I saw, you know, most of the occasion have a few men, 2 or 3. I believe they are leaders. They organize everything, and all the schedules, you know, already, you know, well painted and repeat exactly the same. Because they went to the church 3 times, I can tell what, you know, all the step and schedule. One occasion I say, okay, you have been late for 7 minutes. And then they really stay for 7 minutes more. Because the AV show is 1 hour. And then I say, okay, the first one, I really know their procedure. I said, okay, the first one is read up the statement. But before reading the statement, you have a good photo. And that correctly, they say, oh, yeah, how do you know? And then they take the good photo. And then read out the statement. I said, it's too short. So you still have 3 minutes. And then they read out the statement again. I said, okay, now, is the police liaison officer to take a good photo? And then they really invite the police officer to take. So you ask me, I was really interested on their political view. I mean it because they must have something, want to say. But it was really difficult. And then, one occasion I tried to follow some ladies to the MTR after they done their job because it almost is 1 hour. Okay, they will not, just exceed 1 hour or, less than 1 hour. I really talked to them. And then they just hide themselves. They feel so shy and shameful. I said, but why are you doing this one? And then one lady said, admit that I need to earn money. So that's it. So you've asked me, I don't know. But they use a lot of women. Housewife, mother. They said because the mother wants to protect the children. And that the trio, Benny Tai, KM, and they just, steal their son, their children, and create a conflict in home and something like that. And then I want to hear, but couldn't, just one lady admit that, I need to earn money. That's it.
Oh yeah, could I just add one point? I mean, I certainly haven't researched those women in Hong Kong, but certainly in the mainland, these women older the age of 50 don't have jobs, and so, they're the first people to turn to when the government needs a neighborhood watch. And so I wouldn't be the slightest bit surprised if, some communist party, I don't want to make accusations, but I'm sure that some of these ladies, the older women, anti-Occupy women, are actually paid to do that.
Next question.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first one is actually a follow-up question to the ethnic minority and domestic worker question. Just now we discussed those who were prevented from participating in the movement, but what about those who did go to the streets? And besides supporting for democracy and building a sense of belonging, did they have any special issues that they brought into this movement? Or what demands or special demands or requests that they would like to mobilize through participating in the umbrella movement? I mean, for those ethnic minority people. And the second question, because I'm from Faculty of Education, so it is a bit related to education. As could be observed, the themes of human rights, social justice, and freedom, democracy are parallel themes in the umbrella movement. It seems to be taken for granted that these issues are mutually related to each other, and democracy seems to be commonly regarded as the precondition for social justice, human rights, freedom, etc. And how do you understand the relationship between democracy and social justice, freedom, and human rights? And what do you think of the role of local education, including basic and higher education, in preparing Hong Kong students for such values as social justice and democracy and the relation between them?
For the participation of ethnic minorities, especially youth, because I see more youth, new generation, they took part in the movement. As far as I know, because I almost talked to almost all of them, except, one or two ladies, I couldn't see them. But if I know, they were the South Asians or local, because, we have a mixture, like some other working person in Hong Kong or expats, or, but I talked to the local, South Asians. And I will say, they have a quite pure heart. They said they do support democracy. But if you really want to refer whether they have their own issue, yes, some of them told me that they worry that because lack of democratic political system, that, their rights might be worsened, might be even, affected. So this is what, but they truly support, the local democratic movement. This in another, yes, quite subtle, but is also, you know, quite easy to understand. Some of them, I said that they want to be recognized. Like, you know, we FM artists, we do take part in the local democratic movement. They want to be seen as part of Hong Kong. We are not only the service receiver. They said that we are also, we actively, you know, take part of it, we contribute. Their slogan, their notion, they said that, okay, in the history of the democratic movement, FM artist has been, you know, present, not absent. That is, you know, what they told me. And then, you know, if from my point of view on democracy, if only the simple definition of democracy, like majority rule, I don't think that it will necessarily protect the rights of vulnerable groups. So we always believe that, you know, democracy should be linked with human rights and rule of law. That because, you know, you just imagine if we have only adopt majority rule and without effective mechanism protect the human rights, and that is for the vulnerable group not necessarily will be protected. For example, refugee, the, you know, sexual minority, FM artists not. So we promote, you know, I give talk on the mobile cast that, you know, I always give the topic is human rights and democracy. Human rights, democracy and equal opportunities. Democracy and human rights, something like that. So, and I believe should be linked together, that human rights, democracy, and rule of law. So they will feel, you know, equally important pillars. Yeah, otherwise I think it will not healthy and effective. And for the education, I think it's rather complicated, but for sure that, you know, for every artist, you know, they could not enjoy the equal benefit. I will say that equal benefit from the local education system. So making their access to information, equal opportunities, you know, are very difficult. Until now, it's still very struggling.
I just want to maybe something quick about education. I think it's important to use these rituals and flavors of the movement to change the local education system. And I think that can happen inside the university, inside the classrooms, and it can also mean that you really do have to organize education outside, like Marana's doing now, from the mobile classroom to the umbrella university. I mean, right? It's happening. There is going to be an umbrella university. I think that is really awesome. I mean, there's only one country in the world, I think, that has an umbrella university, and it's Hong Kong, and it's going to be important to think through what that should be like. And for instance, about my first point about using the, you know, the ways of communicating and the languages and the rituals also within institutions. Like, for instance, what I like about this panel is that Gina was hammering on it a lot, that we could only speak for 10 minutes, and that there should be discussion with the public. This is something very simple, but it's actually really important. That, you know, maybe we still spend 2 minutes, you know, inside our own heads and sharing what we've been thinking, but there's many ways of breaking open your conventional ways of sharing knowledge. I do think that there's a long way to go right there, and I think we're going perhaps in the right direction. But maybe the audience can cast a vote on that.
Sorry, I want to respond to your question about the human rights education. Before 1997, you know that there was a forum, a platform we call it civic education, including the, you know, the rule of law, let go system, and also those international conventions, you know, something like that. But after 1997, you know, they canceled the civic education platform, and there's no formal human rights education objective or aims. And now we call the civic education, I mean, under the government, it's all about, you know, loving China. And all the money is go for the exchange, I mean, the China trip, all those, or some we call Yuga, you know, culture, like, you know, the China tradition, value, and culture. And I could not find any that, you know, there is talk about a specific chapter that in our formal curriculum that talk about equal opportunities, human rights, international conventions. There is no. And then because, for the EDP, there is nothing. They say it's a school-based autonomy that you can adopt any topic in the liberal study or the general study in the primary school. But seldom that, the teacher will have a human rights or equal opportunities topic in it. And then we rely on the HAD, Home Affairs Department or Home Affairs Bureau. And the platform, they talk about civic education, and nothing is about human rights, equality, freedom, democracy, also no. And then we rely on EOC, right? Equal opportunities, and also seldom they only talk about the law. What they, the 4 pieces of equal opportunity law says about, but in the broader sense, like about the human rights, the justice, or democracy, no. So in Hong Kong, it's very limited education on human rights.
I think we have time for one more remark or one more question. Yeah.
Hi, I actually want to bring the discussion back to like a broader political situation and feminist movement in Hong Kong. So for me, I see like a better, a very hopeful future for us because, how our younger generation is more active in political situations, and we occupy a lot of participation. And also, from all your sharing today, we can see, a lot of them are very, feminist in a way that we were talking about more gender equality. But I want to bring back to the point where Gina just talked about just now, the establishment in Hong Kong. We see a lot of female political leaders, which whom I think is not that competent. Like, very honest speaking, like not only like Carrie Lam, like also like Leung Mei-Fan, Zhang Lai-wan, all these people, you actually see, okay, like you are in the establishment, and seeing them, how they actually rule Hong Kong is a headache and nightmare. And so I want to seek your opinions on how they're actually impeding the feminist movement in Hong Kong, or are they actually, helping? Because when we talk about female participation in political, in politics, we see a lot of, oh, it's great because a lot of women are on top now, But then if they're not doing their job right, is that actually impeding, the whole feminist rhetoric? Thank you.
Yeah, it's always been ironic to me that the women in power oftentimes are the people who are the most adverse to feminist goals or any kind of feminist platform, and I think that's sometimes how they get into power, because they're not for women's rights, they're not for women's issues. But in any case, I was wondering if anyone in the panel would like to make a final comment on that before we wrap up. Yes, Pooja, please.
I think it's a very astute observation, although it's a pretty obvious one, that unfortunately the women in top leadership haven't really proven to be the kind of boon that women like us would like them to be. But as Gina says, I think it's a testament to the kind of politics they have to play in order to gain access to the positions that they have. And a lot of the campaigning process before they're elected into office or appointed involves discussing platforms and equality and sort of social justice issues are really bargaining chips that are often used by the pro-government camps or those in leadership to secure the women's loyalty before they're even considered. And when they recognize certain women as having a particular agenda or having no agenda at all, then they're ready to sort of throw their force behind them, because in a way, you always want to line up your political colleagues in a way that accords with your future vision for Hong Kong. And as we all know, in Hong Kong, the goal has been to ensure that there's economic prosperity and stability, and anything that would sort of shatter that or cause instability in that sort of vision is sidelined. And I think women's rights is one of them. And we heard from Leda earlier that there is a real fear of the kind of threats that women might pose if they sort of rise in the ranks of leadership. And I think that kind of vision also percolates down to Hong Kong. And it's very unfortunate. I don't think necessarily, though, that this means that the women are doing a disservice. I think it's very important to have role models, to look at people who have been in power and to know that it's possible. And I think for us in Hong Kong, the most important message from the umbrella movement in terms of women's involvement is the visibility. aspect of it. And I think today at the panel, we've really highlighted how visible women have been in the movement, regardless of the media's sort of ignorance of the significant role that they've played. And I think it's up to members of the public to engage in positive discourse involving women's involvement and their contribution. And likewise, the contribution of the women who are making a difference in LegCo or as activists. And I think the more attention we pay to the positive aspects of their contribution, the more likely we are to attract young talent from your generation to run for office and to make that difference, because it's all open for the taking. But it's just that people don't think of themselves as future leaders. But it's very important to have that vision and to groom yourself, because it's all possible.
Pooja, I'm so glad you had the last word. Beautiful. Okay, thank you all to the panelists, and thank you all.